In this video, I'm going to take a look at 3 problems from Chapter 1, Section 4, Exercise 3. There aren't actually any new concepts in this exercise, but it does go a little bit deeper. We're starting to put all the pieces of the puzzle, or most of the pieces of the puzzle, together here. So let me break down the directions. First of all, we need to determine if an argument is either deductive or inductive. And again, there's nothing new here. Does the argument aim to show that the conclusion must be the case? Does the argument aim to show that the conclusion is probably true? And then we're going to take it one step deeper. Inductive, deductive. If it's deductive, is it valid or invalid? If it's inductive, is it strong or weak? Validity only applies to deductive arguments. Strength only applies to inductive arguments. And be sure to get all the lingo straight here. I would highly recommend formulating your own set of notes. These terms are often misapplied on assignments, on tests, on discussion boards. So now is a good time to practice and get it all straight. So again, we'll just go through 3 examples here. The third example in this exercise from the text. The sign on the highway leading into Denver, Colorado, says that the city's elevation is 5,280 feet. It must be the case that Denver is 1 mile high. And this isn't included in the problem, but I've noted it parenthetically here. Given that 1 mile does in fact equal 5,280 feet, which we know is actually true here. Technically, this argument's got a missing premise. That would be the missing premise, and it's innocent enough here. The missing premise really is common background information, but technically that's a missing premise. And there's a name for an argument that's got a missing premise. This is not something that's going to be included in the test, but it's worth knowing. It's called an enthymeme, an argument that's got a missing premise. And again, noted parenthetically, innocent enough common background information. That's the missing premise. So let's get back to the directions here. Let's begin by determining if it's deductive or inductive. And again, surface level analysis, it must be the case. It's deductive. It's aiming to show that this necessarily is true. But take a deeper look at the actual argument and the evidence presented. So the evidence here is a sign posted on the highway. And so this argument is an argument based on signs. The highway sign itself noting the elevation. And an argument based on signs, of course, is inductive. It wouldn't be deductive. There's some chance that the sign is misplaced, that the sign is inaccurate in some sense. But that's highly unlikely. Highway signs, are generally reliable, generally accurate. So this one is inductive. And again, validity doesn't apply to inductive arguments. This one's strong. The sign is probably placed correctly and has accurate information, though that's not necessarily so. The fourth one from the text. Since Christmas is always on Thursday, it follows that the day after Christmas is always a Friday. And again, there's technically a missing premise here. I've noted it parenthetically, given that Friday always follows Thursday. So again, we have an enthymeme. There's a missing premise. It's innocent enough. It's harmless. The missing premise is, again, common, obvious background information. We know that Friday follows Thursday. So let's determine, first of all, again, is it deductive? Is it inductive? Since Christmas is always on Thursday, it follows that the day after Christmas is always a Friday. If our premise is true, that would necessarily be the case. And so this one is deductive. And from here, all we need to figure out is valid or invalid. This one would be, of course, a valid argument, assuming that our premises are true. And remember, to test for validity, you assume that they're true. Valid, invalid doesn't actually have anything to do with the actual truth value of the respective premises. We're not asked to determine if it's sound or unsound. So, of course, we know that the premise here is false. Christmas isn't always on Thursday, but for validity, we're ignoring that. Assuming that Christmas is always on Thursday, the day after Christmas would in fact be Friday, again as noted here, given that Friday always follows Thursday. So this one's deductive, and it's valid. And let's take a look at one last argument here. After taking LSD, Alice said she saw a flying saucer land in the shopping center parking lot. Since Alice has a reputation for always telling the truth, we must conclude that a flying saucer really did land there. So again, the language here seems to indicate that it's deductive. Ignore that. We've seen this multiple times. Let's evaluate the strength of the evidence. So the evidence here comes to us by way of a quote-unquote authority, an eyewitness in this case, supposedly, namely Alice. Alice provides us with some testimony, if you will. And the second premise indicates that Alice has a reputation for always telling the truth. So it says she always tells the truth. This, though, of course, is an argument by way of authority. And given the circumstances, even though she has a reputation for telling the truth, our authority seems to be less than credible, and that, well, she's taking LSD. So an argument based on authority is inductive, and the strength of the authority determines whether or not that it's strong or weak. An argument based on authority is always inductive. It's always possible to some degree or another that our authority, that our expert, that our eyewitness, that the testimony received is in fact wrong. Maybe it's inaccurate intentionally. We don't necessarily know what the case might be. But there's always some chance that an expert, that an authority is wrong. The only question is, what's that actual degree? And given the LSD, we don't at all, in this case, have a reliable authority. Further, take a look at the nature of the claim that's being made. Fine, she's got a reputation for always telling the truth, but she's telling us that there was a flying saucer. So think about your general background information here. What's the probability, generally, that somebody might encounter a flying saucer? It's logically possible, granted, but it's near zero. She's making a really extraordinary claim. This makes it weak right off the bat. Further, she's on LSD. Again, weak right off the bat. Even if we scrap that, this would still be weak. Even if she told us that she saw a flying saucer, and even if she has an honest reputation for telling the truth, this would still be pretty weak. She's making a really extraordinary claim, and we're going to conclude that that's probably true based on the testimony of one individual. We would need a lot more evidence. Now, if 100 independent witnesses, 100 independent witnesses all said this, and none of them were doing LSD, they're not a part of a cult, the testimonies are all independent, then we're getting stronger. But that's a really extraordinary claim. It requires extraordinary evidence. This is not, by any stretch, extraordinary evidence, and that's enough to do it. The claim itself is enough to do it. So it's inductive. It's an argument based on an authority. The authority here is suspect, and so it's a really weak inductive argument. Nobody's going to take this seriously. This is not going to hold up in a court of law if your key witness is on LSD. I don't have really any evidence to stand on here whatsoever.